In this tutorial video, I'm going to walk you through the basics of Adobe XD. I'll begin with artboards and then walk you through the key tools of Adobe XD. Then follow along with my thought process as I design these 3 screens for a flower delivery app. Then I'll finish by showing you how to do some simple prototyping. Now let's get started with the tutorial. If you have any questions along the way or feel like I should expand upon something in another video, leave a comment below. So this is what you will see when you first open Adobe XD. The first action you'll need to take is to decide what artboard size you want your project to be. Adobe helps you by offering 4 options. If you want to design for an iOS mobile app, you'll want to go with the iPhone X, XS 11 Pro option. And you'll notice when you click on the arrow next to it, you can scroll down and choose other artboard sizes within the same category. Another option is to design screens for an iPad app, and again, you can use that arrow to scroll through a few other similar options. And if you wanted to design a landing page, you might choose the Web 1920 option, and again, you can scroll through and see the other options. Maybe you want to do something completely different, and then there's the custom size option where you could type in the width and height pixel dimension that you want to use. But for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to design a few screens for a mobile app, so I'll choose the iPhone X option. A couple things to note about artboards. You'll notice that there's this text above the artboard that says iPhone X/XS/11 Pro-1. You'll definitely want to get into the habit of renaming your artboards because this becomes the file name when you export these screens later. And also it'll just help you keep you sane and organized throughout your project, especially when you get into prototyping. So let's rename this app_welcome screen. And a couple of things you'll notice here, if you wanted to move the artboard, you could just click on that text, or you could click anywhere on the artboard. But if you start to have a bunch of elements, that might be a little bit difficult. So the easiest way is to just click the text and move it around that way. If you wanted to resize the artboard, you could click and drag on any of the corners, or you could also go over here and change it by the width and the height. So maybe you know a specific size of like 800 by 1000 pixels. You can do it that way. But let's undo all of that. You'll notice on the top here there's this little cloud icon. That means that it's going to save this document to the cloud. Now I don't actually want to do that, so I'm going to double click Untitled 1 and I'm going to save my document on the desktop. So going to title it flower_app, choose my computer, and you can choose anywhere you want. I'm going to do the desktop for now, save, and now that cloud icon has disappeared. So let me quickly show you how to create other artboards. There's a few ways to do it. One is you could use the artboard tool over here. You click it and all these options are going to show up on the right, and then you could just click anywhere on the canvas and it's going to create another artboard the same size. And you can just keep doing that. Another way is you could just click on an artboard and press Option and drag, and it'll create a duplicate of that artboard. As you'll see, every time you create a new artboard, the file name is going to be -1, -2, -3, and so on, which again is why I mentioned you'll want to name those as you go. And then to delete an artboard, you can just click on it, press the delete key, or you could right click and press delete. You could also highlight and delete. A couple of simple ways. So I'll quickly run through the tools that you see on the user interface here. So this is the selection tool, and if you hover over each of these, you'll see letters afterwards, and that's the keyboard shortcut. So that's the selection tool. This is the rectangle tool, which you can use to make rectangles, squares, all kinds of shapes. Underneath is the circle or ellipse tool. There's a triangle tool and also a line tool. thing to note about this, if you want to create a straight line, just click and drag and press Shift and it'll lock it into place. There's a pen tool where you can create some simple shapes. Text tool, you can type in any text. Again, we already talked about the artboard option, and then zoom if you wanted to zoom into a particular spot. So if you're familiar with Adobe Illustrator, a lot of these options will be very familiar to you, like the distribute and align options, and these to basically create shapes by adding or subtracting two different shapes. This is component, which is something that's a little bit more advanced and we'll get into later. Here you can adjust the width and height, pixel dimension, the X and Y location, if you wanted to rotate something or reflect it on a vertical or horizontal axis. Responsive resize, which you may use when you start designing across different platforms and you want to create a responsive design. And this is the appearance section where you can adjust and start really getting into the nitty-gritty of design. So for example, let's say we wanted to make this shape a different color. We would choose fill. You can adjust the color here. You can adjust transparency with this slider. If you knew the hex color, you could type that in, or RGB, HSB. You could use the eyedropper to sample colors if you had other colors on your artboard. By default, every shape is going to have a border, so if you don't like that, you can unclick it, or maybe you want to add or maybe you do want to add a border, let's say a pink border, something like that. You can adjust the size. If you wanted to do dashes with a little bit of a gap, again, some options, like as if you were in Illustrator, may have having an inner stroke, an outer stroke, a center stroke, different types of cap options, which would be helpful when you create a line. So you create a line, a red line. Let's make it thicker so it's easier to see. And you can see how the cap options change that. So let's get rid of that border. There's also drop shadows. You can actually have different color shadows if you want. By default, it's going to be black at 16%, but you could adjust this however you want. Maybe you want like 50%. You want like a really harsh shadow, just to dramatize it so you can really see. Like, let's do that. You can see how you have a lot more customization options for shadows. B is for blur. So right now it's a really harsh shadow, but maybe we want it to blend more. So the higher the number is, 10, the more blur that there will be. Let's go even higher, 25, and you can see it really starts to fade. There's also an option for background blur. So let's bring this shape to the front and use that option. So you can see how you can start to create some really cool effects and use these to help design some amazing screens for an app or landing page or whatever your project is. You can adjust the amount of the blur, the brightness, whether it's going, it's more black or more white, also the transparency as well. So that's a quick overview of the interface. Now let's dive in and show you more by actually designing a few screens. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to create a fake app where you can order flowers from. And the first screen I want to start with is that logo loading page. So how would I go about doing that? I want to have a photo background. So there's a couple of ways that you could do that. One is you could just drag photos from your Finder or wherever they are located on your computer. You could just drag them onto your artboard and then resize them and do it that way. Then you have a background image. I like to have my images contained inside of a shape. So one way to do that is, let's delete that and draw a rectangle shape and resize it to the same size as the artboard. Now when I drag my photo in to my document, you'll notice that the rectangle highlights because you can drag and drop the image into that. And then you could resize the image within that container. And it just makes for a cleaner experience. And it also is a lot easier to just drag and drop because maybe I don't like that photo and I just want to see what a couple of other ones look like, and it's very easy to just drag, drop, and change. Okay, so let's go with this background for now. Let's remove the border and now use the text tool. I'm going to have the name be Sunday Florals. And I'm going to center the text. Let's make it white. To resize, you can just drag on that little circle. It's very easy to resize from that. Let's try a different typeface, something kind of retro feeling, Cooper Black. I think the size is good, but I want to adjust the leading, get it a little closer. Okay, so the text isn't that legible. Maybe I'll try changing the color. Actually, I think what I want to do is create a gradient fade. So how would I do that? I would create another rectangle on top, maybe use the black background blur option, move the border, and let's see, keyboard shortcut to move an object to the front is Command Shift right bracket. That looks kind of cool, but it wasn't quite what I had in mind. I actually wanted to create a gradient blur. So let's uncheck the background blur and then change this to linear. Let's do black to white. Maybe change one of the blend modes, see what that looks like, multiply. So that was more of what I was trying to get at, but the black is a little bit harsh, so maybe we want to change that color to a different color. So let's sample from the actual photo, maybe pink. You can adjust the gradient this way. It's still a little bit too harsh. So I'm just going to drag that down. Maybe adjust the opacity. Let's do 50. Okay, I think that looks good for now. So that's the loading page. Now let's create another artboard by dragging and pressing Option. And this will be like an item page, like one of the actual flowers. So let's title this App Item Roses. Okay, and then I'll delete everything that's on it. This would be to order a specific flower, in this case roses. So let's draw a rectangle here, center it. And this is going to house the image for the rose. So just drag and drop that. See if I want to do that. Let's do this one with the red rose. So I want this to take up a good portion of the page. Maybe something like that. Unclick the border. I want to make the image larger so that you can really see the rose. Let's try rounding just these top corners. So in order to do that, press Option and hold down that one corner. Let's do 20. Do this side also. See what that looks like. And maybe draw another rectangle underneath to connect. And then again, here we're going to want to round these two bottom corners. Let's pull a background color from here. Uncheck the border. I want this to be like a peachy color. So maybe pull something from one of the roses and then just kind of play around with that. Actually, let's go with a deep red to go with the rose. Okay, now let's add some text that says red roses. Let's remove that border. Okay, I'm going to keep this as the same brand font at the top for the title of the item, but I think I want to add a supplementary typeface. Actually, let's left align all of this. Adjust the leading, give it a little bit more breathing space. Now let's add a button call to action. Underneath. Let's make this like a really pale pink. Remove the border. Maybe add some rounded corners, same as the rectangle, and then add some text on top that says order. Make this bold, not bold italic, bold. Maybe it should be the same color. Let's make the rose a little bit bigger and move it down. Let's give it a background. Move that shape to the back. See what it would look like if this was like a deep green. Again, no border. And let's add a gradient fade because I feel like this is too harsh of a line right here. So let's add another square to the top. Change the fill to a linear gradient from black to white. Use the blending mode, multiply, let's see, overlay. Now let's do multiply. Now it feels a little harsh, so let's adjust the opacity on that. Maybe bring it down to 45. You could also drag it up this way. Let's see, what would it look like if this was the same typeface? Thinking maybe it might look better if this was all centered. Use the center align tool to center all of these. Now I feel like that this red is just like way too dominating. So let's see what we can do about this. Something like that looks a little nicer. It's like a tone on tone. I think that looks a little bit more subtle. Change this to white. Make this darker. Okay, I think that looks a little better with the contrast because now what you focus on is the red rose versus the rectangle. And now let's design a screen that goes in between this, because something needs to happen between opening the app and choosing the red rose. So let's create another artboard, and I don't know, let's just title this menu. Okay, and delete all of this. So maybe what happens is, let's have the same background, paste that, add another rectangle on top, do a harsher background blur. And so maybe what happens is the app will ask a question. What flower would you like to send today? Let's center this. Change the color. Let's keep it white. So let's move this over here. Choose red roses. This would actually be a good way to use the repeat grid. So let me delete these real quick. And select these two, group them, and choose the repeat grid option. You'll notice these little handles on the side. So if you just click and drag, then we can have 4 different buttons, and then in between you can change the amount of spacing. So let's do that. Now let's add our text. Yellow sunflowers, purple tulips, blue hydrangeas. Okay, now let's dive into some simple prototyping. So right now we're in the design tab, but when we want to start prototyping, we need to switch to prototype mode. And not much visually changes except for the options over here. So let's click on the app welcome screen. So basically what we want is for this to transition into the second screen, which is the menu. And over here we have options. So do we want the trigger to be a tap, drag, time, keys and gamepad, or voice? So since this is the loading page, we don't actually want the user to make any action. We just want it to happen automatically. So we'll choose the trigger of time. And you can have a little bit of a delay here. So let's try 0.6 seconds and see what that does. You can change the transition. I'll just do auto animate, and then you'll see that it populated with the Artboard app menu. You can adjust the easing or the duration. I don't think I'm going to need any of that. So 0.3 seconds would be how long it would last. So let's quickly preview that real quick by pressing play. So that was pretty quick. So we might actually want to make that a little bit longer. Let's try 1 full second. Yeah, I think that's a little bit better. Now what I want is for someone to click on this button and then to tap on it, and it goes to this page. So right now these are all groups, so I need to double click so that I'm just clicking on this shape, click on the arrow, and move that to this artboard. I'm going to have the trigger be tapped so that someone is clicking on the button and it goes to that screen. Have the option be auto animate. It goes to that artboard, and let's just keep 0.3 second delay. That should be good enough as is. Now let's preview that again. So let's click on the first screen and press play. Transitions into that. Click on red rose, and then it transfers into that. So pretty cool. So let's pretend that this is a mobile site versus an app, and that we want an action to happen when someone is hovering over this button. So how do we design that? Well, first let's go back to the Design tab. Click on the button and the text, group them. Now this is where components come into hand. So let's click on the plus to create a new component. So this would be the default state. If we wanted to create something new for when it hovers, we would click on the plus and choose hover state. Now, what do we want to happen when someone hovers over this button? How about we remove the fill and instead add a border with the same color, maybe make it slightly thicker border. Maybe we also change the typeface to the same color. So let's click that and go back to the default state. And now let's preview how that looks. Click on red roses. And now when we hover, we see how the button changes. So that was a very basic intro into Adobe XD and how to design a couple of screens and do some simple prototyping. And now I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know, what would you like to learn next about Adobe XD? If you enjoyed this tutorial and found it helpful, please give it a like and subscribe for more tutorials in the future.